Thank you all for joining the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Noontime webinar series that's been happening on Thursdays this winter and spring. Starting to get to the edge where I think everyone wants to be outside rather than at their kitchen table, but feel free to eat as long as you're muted. So today we're trying something new with a little less formal presentations and trying to facilitate a conversation about tomato high tunnel growing and maybe even high tunnels more generally speaking. And before we get going too far, if anyone's here, if you have curiosities you want to throw in the chat, I can kind of piece those together. If somebody puts something in that you see and you also want to address, putting like a thumbs up next to that. If you're that sophisticated in the chat, you can do that. But it'd be great to just kind of get a pulse on what everyone here is interested in. So feel free to just like raise your hand and talk if you're interested in that format. I don't think we have too many people for that to happen today. I put together just a few questions to kind of formulate that conversation. So I'm curious about what are your pinch points? A lot of folks have been growing in tunnels for a long time. There's a lot of great experience, but it's still kind of we're still growing in ground, a lot of folks using organic production methods, and there's still a lot of faltering, at least for me, where we trip over what we're doing and we're like, I did that wrong again this year. What's been going on? So identifying those pinch points and also what you're leaning towards in the future. And if nobody talks today, I put together kind of just some topics that I thought could kind of guide the conversation in some slides. So think about soils, the horticultural side of things, and then just like what are the favorite little tools and tricks people have, and then finally disease, pest management, and ventilation. So we can kind of bop around. That doesn't have to be the format, but those were kind of my brainstorming list. And then we have a few folks who, thank you all so much, who volunteered to share a little bit. We've got Gerard from Berry Creek Farm, Ryan from Naked Acre. I think Zay is hopefully here. I actually don't see them yet. So maybe we won't hear anything from Route 5 Farm, but was hoping to hear from them. And also Ananda Gardens, Patrick Sullivan is here as well. So no pressure to you folks, but I know you all have a lot of great information, and I would love to kick it off. Gerard, if you want to try sharing your screen once again.
Okay,
here.
Try.
Thank you. And yeah, just keep peppering the chat if folks have ideas or questions. I can read it, or like I said, you can either use the hand raise function or just try to do some talking. That looks great, Gerard. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I do a soil test every year, and I follow the recommendation. I just had maybe 2 wheelbarrow per bed of edge manure as extra to increase the organic matter. And I'm surprised that every year, at least the potassium is always low. I cannot raise the potassium, yeah. But my sulfur is very high too. Julia, so I graft the tomato on Maxi4. I plant them the first week of April. And then, so that's how it looks. So I have 5 beds in the greenhouse, 4 beds of tomato, and 1 bed in rotation is cucumber and lettuce and Asian green. So on white plastic, 3 lines of water per bed. And I irrigate 3 times a day, 8 o'clock, 11, and 1. And it goes from 5 minutes to 20 minutes every time. And then I go down to 10 as the season progresses. Oops. So I have 2 wires where I hang the tomato, and they are 2 feet apart. I figure it gives more air in the middle. Yeah, I've wrapped 2 turns twine around the tomato. Apparently, I was reading a long time ago, there was in Quebec, Tom Pouce And they said the tomato like to be stressed. So they advised to put the 2 turn of around the twine, 2 turn around the plant to give a little bit of stress. And then after I put the clip, the main leader goes on the back, and the new one goes in the front here. And after at this time, I start to take 2 leaves, the 2 bottom leaves every week. And when there is too much leaves here, I take some too, yeah, to make sure there is a good airflow. The first 2 bloom, I leave 7 fruit per bloom, then 6, and then after 5. The next 2, 6, and then all the rest of 5 fruit per blossom. And then I don't have bees, so I check them once a week, at least once a week, once every 2 days, other day, for pollination. The problem I had recently is sometime end of June it gets too hot, and I don't have a good pollination. The temperature, when I plant, before planting, I have a ground heat. And so when the temperature gets at 65 in the ground, that's when I plant them. And then sometimes some growth are way too strong, so I leave a 3rd leader until they reach the top of the line, and this time I cut them. Otherwise, after the first week of August, I top them off too, because by the time I don't do winter tomato. And so in September, I believe that's the last, yeah. So in September, usually I run the heat at night because I still quite a good crop, and to avoid too much moisture. And after in October, I think it's not worth it to run the heat for the tomato leftover. My problem I had one year was potato aphids, and I was able to control them with Aphidius RV and Aphidoleti. And then now in April, I collect the ladybugs on my south window and release them in the greenhouse. And so far, knock on wood, I haven't had damage. And the other disease I have late in October, mostly end of September, October, it's botiris. Start to have too much moisture, but I can live with that, yeah. And then basically that's it, how I do. I just make sure I have once a week, it's every Friday morning, we are trimming them, make sure they have plenty of air circulation. And yeah, so it takes quite a, when they are in full growth, it takes quite a while to trim them, yeah. But 2 person, a good 4 hours to do that, yeah.
Thanks, then, Gerard.
Yeah.
Those are beautiful looking tomatoes.
Yeah, so far they do well, yeah.
Yeah. Well, your harvests were really impressive. So for the study we did the last couple of years, we had farmers tracking their harvests, and yours were really right up there. So yeah, great. Does anyone have any questions for Gerard before we switch over to the next speaker?
What variety?
I grow Rebelski, Big Dana, and then a few Marnero, B Orange, and Tommy Maru.
Hey, Gerard, do you front load all the nutrients, or do you?
Yeah. I follow the recommendation from the soil test, and I put about 2 wheelbarrow of edge manure, and then that's it.
Couple questions in the chat for you. When do you transplant, and do you heat in the shoulder seasons? So I guess you said you heat in the fall, right?
Yeah. I start the heat end of March to heat the soil. Then I plant them first week of April. Transplant them first week of April, and then I heat again in September. The night are getting too cold, to avoid too much moisture.
And Hans wants to know if you're using or what the pros and cons are of the white versus black plastic.
I guess the white brings more light. It seems to me, I heard one time 1% more light, 1% more yield. So that's why. Yep. And as I heat the soil, I don't need to have black plastic to keep the soil warmer, I guess. Yeah.
Great. And then Lisa is wondering, do you do the same fertility for all your tomatoes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone gets the same, yeah.
And then one more final question before, I don't know, Ryan, if you want to go next with a few slides, but one more question for Gerard. What high temperature threshold in Fahrenheit and is it soil or air of most concern? I think I'm not sure. I don't know, Bud, if you want to unmute, and I might be muddling your question.
No. So when I plant the tomato, I need my soil temperature at least 65, 66. The air temperature, I keep 64 minimum. And the problem when it gets too hot, in June last year, get over 100 degrees, even with the roll-up side, the fan, and the door open. It was I could not keep it down. And that's where I lose some on the pollination, I find.
Yeah, I felt like last year was a kind of a doozy for that ill-timed heat waves for tunnel growing, a lot of blossom losses. So I think that's something I've been thinking a lot about with increasing summer heat, is how we can cool down tunnels. So Ryan, do you want to queue up your slides? Thank you so much, Gerard. That's great.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah.
If people have more questions for him too, just keep typing them in the chat and we can just keep talking. So Ryan is way up in Hyde Park, I guess not too far from Gerard. Take it away.
Yeah, he's a little farther north. But hi everyone, my name's Ryan, and I'm at Naked Acre Farm in Hyde Park, like Becky said. So I do a few different houses. I have about 1/3 of an acre under cover and do various tomatoes in different houses. I do 30-inch beds, which is just basically BCS width. It's roughly 4-foot centers in the beds. I do 18-inch spacing for heirlooms, and the hybrids and the cherries get 2 feet. I do 2 drip lines, and I do kind of some landscape fabric that's 15 feet that I've been using for a couple years, and I just plant right into the holes. And then last year I started experimenting, just bringing landscape fabric right up to the plants, so I could kind of water and have access to the soil. So as far as amendments, I've been working with Becky for a couple years now, for the field and for the houses, and she's just been so helpful, and it's just such a pleasure working with you, Becky. So thank you so much. I really appreciate all your help in getting us where we're trying to go. And the plan that we developed was, one of the things was concerned about salts, because in the field I use ruse and wood ash. Obviously I don't want to bring that into the houses because of salt buildup. So For nitrogen, we started using blood meal, feather meal. Last year, I did a little experimenting with Pro Booster, which is kind of a mix of all those things. And then bone meal for E, and then for potassium, we decided to go with like a third soluble and 2/3 granular for the potash. So there's some immediately available, and then some that kind of will extend throughout the season. Last year, I started using a little bit of wood ash to see what that would do. My pH is about 6.1, 6.2 in some of the houses, so I wanted to bring that up just a little bit. And I have a lot of it on hand, so I figured I'd use some of it. And then when I have compost on hand, I put that in the beds as well. So I don't graft yet. We're still kind of got some other things going on as far as construction and trying to, get our place up and running. But I do a mix of hybrid, heirlooms, high looms, and then cherry tomatoes. Obviously, the best are the hybrids. And some of the issues that I've been coming up with the past couple of years, last year especially, was birds getting to the houses. And so I started using those inflatable, crazy, trippy eye things. Those didn't really seem to work. A lot of like flagging around, and it doesn't seem to work. So I think this year I'm going to have to either get some chicken wire or something to contain the houses, just to make it a little harder for them to get in. One thing that came up last year was I got my humane test back, and the pH had lowered by about 0.5. It was down into the high 5s, and I had a little bit of a panic. Becky probably remembers. And it was just kind of concerning, and we were trying to figure out why. So I talked to Bruce Hoskins at Humane, and basically what he said is using the type of amendments that I did. And this is all very new to me. I'm not a chemist by any means, but they create a lot of soluble salt. So in the tests, it brings the pH down, but it doesn't affect soil acidity. So it's what he said was I don't know if anybody has seen this before, but if anybody has, he said when you submit the test next year, to write in a note to measure salt pH and compare, because there'll be 2 different tests for the pH. So it didn't actually affect the pH, so the panic was not necessary, but it was concerning. And then some improvements for the future. That's some disease over there. Thinking about potentially using fertigation. I do all my amending right in the beginning, and then water all that stuff in. But maybe a little more boosts throughout the season might improve growth and fruit production, things like that. I'm going to graft the heirlooms this year because they seem to do worse and worse for me every year. So I'm going to experiment with grafting just the heirlooms, and if those take, then I might just graft everything. Labor has always been kind of in short supply here, just because I've typically done everything myself. In the past 2 years, I've had some part-time help, but last year I had somebody helping me prune, and it was amazing. It was so great having him here. So better, more consistent pruning, picking earlier, storing, sort of 75% ripe fruits. And then this year I'm going to do some interplanting. Other things I'm thinking about irrigation. Becky and I have talked about this, and she's brought it up before, about how the drip lines, there's a lot of dry, like deserty space in the beds. Especially with my water capacity, it's challenging to get the whole bed watered. And so thinking about different ways to, get more moisture on the bed, maybe doing overhead before I put the fabric down. And also, as opposed to a timer, I had things on timers last year, and some places were getting wetter than others, too wet. And so it's more of a, about reading the soil at my place than just having a timer. Looking into straw, looking into the clipper system, and then better ways to harvest. As I'm getting older, I want to be able to make it a little easier for myself. And then better ventilation. We're still working on a house, on a barn, on all the houses. So as we slowly move forward, I'd like to put in some of the fine tuning details in the houses. And so that the things on the right don't happen. So that's what I got going on at my place.
That's a pretty good list. Thank you so much, Ryan. You've got a lot going on there. It's amazing how much you pull off with basically one person. And Bruce is here from Maine. He typed in the chat kind of part of the clarification to your pH problem. I
Oh,
don't know
that's
if you wanna-
great. That's really helpful. He can speak to it way better than I can, for sure.
He says, hi, EC artificially drives down the pH measurement. We now run pH in a dilute salt solution to compare with the pH measured in water and correct the reported pH where necessary. So yeah, and I'm really grateful to Bruce for joining today. He's actually like the real brains behind all this tomato work. He's been super helpful and does all the analyses for almost everybody in Vermont and elsewhere using high tunnels. So anyone have questions for Ryan? Can move on and then have a big conversation as we go. Chris Callahan's also here with I put together a few ventilation slides. We can talk about ventilation improvements, like some cheap and easy ways to make those improvements while you're still building your house, Ryan. Patrick, did you have some photos you wanted to share?
Yeah, I do. I put together a couple slides here.
Great, thank you. Patrick's in Montpelier at Ananda Gardens and grows really beautiful, super beautiful crops and tomatoes.
So we grow about 1,200 plants total. We have one full 3,000 plus square foot greenhouse full of our slicers, and then a half of one greenhouse of that same size with cherry tomatoes. This gives us plenty for 150 member CSA. We give everyone tomatoes every week, and then 2 to 3 small to medium wholesale accounts for wedding catering, restaurants. So our slicers are a couple inches germinated right now. We see them at end of February to beginning of the March, and then we're planting those out. Last year we planted them out, I think April 25th, April 26th, and have supplemental heat in that greenhouse. And then we're seeding our cherry tomatoes later, and we're planting those in late May when we no longer need any heat because we don't have any heat in that greenhouse. And that seems to work out well. We like to have tomatoes early, but we're not trying to get tomatoes the earliest we can because of our marketing, because of our sales channels to the CSAs. We're front loading the amendments. Greenhouses have gotten lots of compost. They're around 10% organic matter. And I think it equals out to about 6 inches of compost a year. We usually do a dose in the spring and a dose in the fall. Because of our nutrient levels, a lot of them came back above optimal. We're gonna try moving towards more woody compost and compost without animal manures in the future. So I don't think we'll put any compost in this summer, and we would like to use more straw mulch to get organic matter back in the soil. And then even though the soil tests say that the nutrient levels are pretty optimal, it's still a little nerve-wracking to me to grow the tomatoes without any supplemental amendments. So we're putting a little bit less than a 5-gallon bucket of amendments per 100-foot bed. And that is mostly peanut meal, 25% alfalfa, and then a yogurt container or 2 of Pro Booster, all mixed together. And then our spacing, we space really close together. We've got 1 plant per foot, and then 8 rows per 32-foot wide greenhouse. We've tried more rows than that, but kind of settled on 8 is the densest, the closest together that we feel comfortable and feel like we have good airflow. But one thing to be said, you really got to stay on top of pruning at that kind of density. So we're irrigating. We have a bit of a different, I was interested about Gerard's irrigation scheme because we do it differently. We irrigate about, I think it works out to every 3rd day. And depending on whether we have one greenhouse that's got 6-inch drip and another foot. So it's about an hour, but it really depends on the soil. And the one that the drip that doesn't emit quite as much water, we're running more like an hour and 20 minutes. Yeah, similar to Ryan, I used to have timers, but sometimes they didn't work. And I've gone back to just doing it manually, setting in a little alarm on my phone and then turning it off. We are spraying the plants with kelp and sea crop in a backpack sprayer until we get too busy, 3 or 4 times in the spring, mostly for, micronutrients and for soil biology. I'll talk about in the next slide, one of the issues we had was kind of solved. We think it was solved by the kelp. Slicers, similar varieties, Rebelski, Geronimo, Big Denna, and then some Marnero and Margold. We grew Muscovich once. We really liked it. Probably the first year we grew tomatoes, and they were all grafted, and we're going to try and grow grafted Muscovich again. And then cherry, Sakura, Sun Peach, and Turinhina. We've tried other ones, but those are the ones that we really like, give us a nice color diversity. 1 liter per plant we're pruning to. And then we prune pretty aggressively to above the fruit cluster that we want to harvest as the season progresses. And I think similar time to Gerard, and it is really nice having help with pruning. It gets hot in there in the summer, so we're interested what other people are doing, because I think it's our crew probably looks at it as one of the harder jobs, being in there for 4 or 5 hours, pruning in a really hot day. If there's a stretch of sunny days and we need to get the tomato house pruned and we have harvest in the morning, we just need to get in there and do it. I think roughly every 10 days, a little bit less than once a week, but maybe we're pruning pretty aggressively to compensate for a little bit longer between. Some of the issues we've had, white unripe core in the past, even though the plants looked really healthy, and we started spraying kelp and that seemed to have totally gone away. It may be due to our watering scheme too, but we continue to water in a similar way and have no problem with that. So I think it was a nutrient deficiency. And it was definitely worse in some varieties. I'm forgetting a little bit, but I think the Marnero, Margold, those varieties were more susceptible than the regular slicers. And it wasn't a huge deal. Our CSA was fine with it. Just, a few people mentioned it, and it's something that we really want to avoid because we're trying to get good money for selling our tomatoes to chefs. Tomato hornworm, and so this greenhouse that's in this picture has insect netting on it, so we don't have to worry at all about tomato hornworm. But in the cherry tomato house, we have tomato hornworm. A couple years ago, we controlled it perfectly we had a really experienced crew, and they saw the frass, as soon as it was around, and we sprayed BT once or twice, and it was gone. And this last year, we didn't catch it in time, because I'm usually not the one harvesting, and we had some more inexperienced crew, and that really devastated the cherry tomato harvest. It took so much extra time to sort through the fruit, try and scout for the tomato hornworm. So I think almost insect netting is worth it, like just for tomato hornworm, even though it takes some more ventilation. Agreed with Ryan, the ventilation. We made some improvements last year, and it did really help. We've got 4 half fans and then wall really powerful vent. Things we want to improve on. I mentioned the mulching with straw. I'd really love to
This would
mulch
have
the
been the
whole
best
greenhouse
thing
with
to be
straw.
sitting and listening to. a real-
Record keeping. I have an idea of what kind of a total harvest is, or what weekly harvest, because of our pretty simple sales channels, but I'd like to have a good way. Any recommendations of a good way to record keep? We always kind of start out with good intentions, have some sheets in the wash and pack house, and then in the busyness of things at some point seems to just be one of the things that doesn't happen. We're gonna graft some this year. We started off grafting, and then I moved back to not grafting because we're getting really good harvests. Not sure it's worth the time and expense. And one year we had a complete failure of the grafts, which it makes me tentative. So this year we're going to try and graft, and we also just planted backup seeds. So for me, that's kind of eased my fears of trying to graft, just having replacement plants in the case that they don't work. Also found that the little grafting tool from Johnny's that cuts at the perfect angle seems to like really improved the percentage of grafts that took. And then the other thing, yeah, like Ryan, harvest cart, I saw some photos or video of a harvest cart with some big wheels on it, something that you could just wheel down the row as you're harvesting. That seems really appealing to me because not always sure the best way that people are like balancing a tomato flat on a hip, setting it down, harvesting some, coming back to the bin, or you have a big handful of fruit. It just is not ideal. So would like to improve our harvest method. One thing that I'm interested about is in our greenhouse with the insect netting, we did not have bumblebees in time for the first flower cluster. And we had a fine fruit set, and then we added bumblebees and didn't really see any marked improvement. Same with our pepper house is all insect netted, and we don't have any bumblebees in there, aren't shaking the plants, and seem to have like a fine fruit set. So that's, yeah, I'm wondering if anybody else has that experience, or if it's really worth it to keep bumblebees in there as an added protect. And that is everything.
Thanks, Patrick. Looks beautiful. Look at all that fruit. It's really cool to learn more about your production. Yeah, a couple really great points about the insect netting. Chris and I have actually been talking about kind of diving deeper into understanding the influence insect netting has, or the impact it has on ventilation in tunnels, and the costs and benefits of using it, and what the kind of minimum size is. Like if you're just trying to keep out hornworms, then you could use a bigger screen size. Those moths are huge. You can use like chicken wire. No, but so how to like balance that need for ventilation and even allowing beneficials entrance into the tunnel, but keep out the things you want to keep out. So lots to investigate there. Yeah,
Becky, with the insect netting, when I should note that a couple years we've had aphids get in on some plants that were brought into the farm, and then it becomes a huge issue. Last year especially, you couldn't find ladybugs. In years past, we could like pretty quickly order 10 pounds of ladybugs and release them for a pretty reasonable price, but last year we couldn't get any. So that is one consideration, that if you have aphids get in, which doesn't seem to happen on the houses that are open, the natural kind of system of things takes care of the aphids, but in those houses that nothing else can get in there, it becomes a problem.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because you're changing the balance of things by having that netting up for better or for worse. And I know with cucumbers, the parthenocarpic cucumbers, people want to insect net to keep out cuke beetles, but then what happens with everything else? So Chris is going to figure that all out for you guys and get back to you next year. Just kidding. But there's one more farmer who is going to talk. Zay, did you bring some pictures, and did you want to share? Zay's from Route 5 Farm. We were having some issues with tomato splitting. We water drip tape starting at 45 minutes. And then as the season goes on, we split it into 2 watering sessions, once in the morning, once at night for 20 minutes. Any suggestions on irrigation tips to avoid splitting? I guess that's a question for anybody, actually.
We have the hybrid heirloom split a lot, all the time. And then none of the other varieties seem to split. So I wonder if it's a varietal thing too.
Yeah, I think, Sam, it's common, the splitting, and I do think it's more varietal than anything, but that might be just too, depending on your soil type, that might just be too much. You might try going drier, but I think the consistency of water is important to the splitting. So, Patrick has so much organic matter and moisture retention in his soil that his watering scheme works really well. on a sandy soil, that might not work so well. So there are tools and a lot of good research going out there on watering, like tensiometer, but some of the research is pointing to like farmers having just as good a sense if you feel the soil when it needs water and when it doesn't. So, and then Margaret Skinner saying, isn't regular watering the key to reducing tomato splitting? I think it is. I always wonder, you know, if it's really rainy, on our soils, we get a lot of side infiltration. So I adjust it based on like the moisture and kind of the rapidity of plant growth, but I wouldn't say it's very scientific. I don't know if other people have watering advice. One thing we've been finding, the 2018 high tunnels survey showed that a lot of people had only like 1 or 2 drip lines on their tomato plants. And if you, I don't know if you've like pulled up tomatoes at the end of the season, especially grafted plants, those feeder roots are going way, way, way out, even into your walkways, and to make sure that the watering lines are feeding all those roots. So even 4 lines seems to be a really good number to have. And you could turn on 2 early at planting and then turn on the rest as the plants get bigger. Any luck, say?
I can't seem to allow
okay.
it in my preferences for some
Okay,
reason.
no worries. Why don't we just open it up to conversation and you can just share your experiences at Route 5 as we go. So I can open it up for questions and then address some of the issues that came up kind of specifically. I have a few slides kind of covering some of those things. Lisa is asking, general question for discussion, wondering if anyone who is using fertigation has different, do you want to just talk, Lisa? I feel awkward. Can you unmute yourself? Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, my name is Lissa. I'm over in New York, and I did participate in your study the past couple of years, Becky. And something that came up for me was just like, I grow slicers, which were in the study, but then I also grow some heirloom types and some cherries. And I had really good success with the recommendations that I got through Becky's study. And I wanted to know how to use those, how to adapt the fertility for my other varieties. And what I found was when I did the 2/3 up front and the 1/3 through fertigation, it was definitely too much for the cherries. And I just didn't have the same results in the others. And I know, Becky, you talked about maybe doing a study later on those different types of tomatoes, which would be awesome. So I'm wondering if anyone has any, like, if there's anyone that's growing those different types that is doing type specific fertigation for their tomatoes. And then I'm also wondering if the people have methodologies for managing fruit load and avoiding blossom drop. I know that the first person that spoke talked a little bit about that, and I'm just wondering if anyone else has systems they use.
Thanks, Lissa. I'm so glad you're here. I wanted to clarify, how did you know that it was too much fertility for the cherries and heirlooms?
Just the stem. I mean, I guess I'm just assuming the stems were like really huge. Like the plants looked like they were really dark green. The stems were like really huge. They looked very freakish. And then there was even some like burning, almost I would call it, like on the tips of the new leaves, like at the leader of the plant. So I guess I didn't ever have anyone come in and diagnose that. But when I stopped doing it, the plants definitely did better.
Input. I threw together a couple slides about kind of some of that nutrient stuff, and a lot of you guys have heard been a study, but that the principle we've been kind of getting at, and Vern and Bruce at UMaine and a lot of other folks in New England have been supporting this work to understand better these nutrient inputs, like you're talking about, Lissa, like lining it up with the plant needs. And I think the basic principle is like the more biomass and the more fruit output, the more nutrients you need. But that a lot of that has to do with planting density. Like Patrick's like cramming his plants in there, he's going to need more nutrients to support that. And then also if you're taking double liters or single liters, like if you're doing a cherry tomato with just 1 liter or just 2 liters even, it might just be, too vigorous of a nitrogen application. So I'm trying to get to the concept here is like biomass, right? So thinking about how much biomass that plant is, the window, the duration in which it's growing. And then these are the recommendations we were using for that study. So like, Lisa, you might drop down to low yield for cherries and heirlooms in your scenario. And what we were recommending was good yield, or you might go down to medium yield. Not that you're trying to get a low yield necessarily, but that your crop, kind of the whatever crop genotype, whatever it is only going to really put out that much. So I don't know, we're still figuring it out, but I think these spreadsheets have a lot to support kind of that understanding. And I, just as a little bit of a learning, I think from this year's study was I felt like we did have a little bit of excessive nitrogen on some farms, especially those that planted later. So I'm curious about kind of tempering that a little bit. So, and also curious on that fertigation note, how much you were putting on and how much other people are putting on. I have a little slide on that. This is what we were recommending. I don't know if other people were doing this. There are other products out there too. I don't know if people are using some of the soy-based fertigation products. This is the cheapest or least expensive organic and kind of low bar way to do it. So that's what we've been recommending.
This is Scott. I would just add a thought that I followed Becky's recommendation, and I think I'm echoing Patrick or Ryan. I mean, it just improved everything. It works so well. You know, I just hope, Becky, you're going to report to your higher ups how many people you helped.
It wasn't just me. It's just taking what Bruce said, and the lab's been really helpful, and the work of other people getting this all rolling. But I think it's been exciting to see that, like, really what we're expecting out of high tunnels is so much more than what we expect from the field. And we're in a pretty unique scenario growing in ground. So getting those soils up to snuff is pretty big. How about other things that have come up? I have a couple of ventilation shots. Do people want to talk about ventilation in the time left, or?
Scott asked a question about shade cloth as well, Becky. I'd like to hear what folks are doing with shade cloth and experiences and
That's from down south. So he came up here, and one of the first years I went out to his farm, he's like, "Why are my tomatoes leggy?" And I was like, "Dude, you're covering it up with shade for like 4 you're in Vermont now." But
I came from the Middle Atlantic.
I think
yeah. They were very, they were big. There was a lot of internodal space. They were very leggy. Yeah.
But yeah, I think I was wishing we had shade cloth last year on all of our tunnels. I think that most of what I've read is like 30%, but I don't know what people's experiences have been, or if they're using that paint. Well, Scott and I went through this whole thing too with that what was it called? Cool Ray?
Yeah, Cool Ray. It's a kaolin clay product, I think.
Other growers
Surround as well. Yeah.
Well, that's a good idea.
I don't know.
I've sprayed Surround. That works pretty well. And I think the old time thing is actually to put lime up there. I think that was an old greenhouse grower trick, going back to the 1960s or so, spray lime.
I tried that in a panic. Somebody had said that, and with like a paint gun thing. And I just went into a panic one hot day and made a slurry and just like threw it, like was throwing handfuls up, and it didn't work very well. I guess I'm really curious about like automation options for shade cloth, because I think we're going to be seeing a lot of these. Like last summer, it went from like so hot to so cool to so hot again, and I didn't know how to manage that. I think tomatoes in particular get freaked out by the extremes. So yeah, I've just been trying to figure out what we can do, because those paints will like wash off after a lot of rain, but not quickly enough to manage for.
Yeah, even if not automation, at least having some systems in place, like even just manual, kind of the same way that manual roll up sides have helped a lot of people. I don't know, has anybody got a nice system where it's easily deployed and then retracted.
Well, this is Vern. I just wonder if you need to, that midsummer photosynthesis is saturated above and beyond by ambient sunlight. So I'm not sure what you're gaining by getting rid of 30% shade from, mid-June to mid-July.
Are you
So
saying
we
what?
leave it on.
I'd have to dig deeper, but that's kind of my assumption, is there's way more light than the plants can use at that time of year.
That makes sense. Hans, did you have a comment? Well, what about some, like, just in the last couple of minutes, innovations on, oh, I see a couple questions in the chat. Experience with topping plants. We have a short season. Noah's asking this. We have a short season from May 10th to mid-September. We've never topped our plants and wondering if we might benefit. Any thoughts about that?
We top ours. Oh, sorry. Oh, we top ours we have a short season too, and we transition our tunnels to greens in September. So we top ours at the end of July, beginning of August. And I actually flagged a flower truss at one point just to see if we were doing it at the right time, to see when when that fruit was going to ripen, and that timing worked really well for us. And we're just over on the other side of the lake in the Adirondack.
Yeah, we top ours too after the first week of August, and usually by third week of October, it's done. Yeah, we don't have any more tomato, which is what we want. So yeah, I guess it's worth it. Yeah, to do it.
We also we top ours at the end of July as well, and finish production at the end of September to flip to more greens.
I feel like I had read, I have to pull it up, but read something recently-ish, like in the last couple of years, about kind of the physiological changes that topping has on plants and how it kind of redistributes nutrients too. Like there's some thought that maybe it's by topping, you're sending all the hormones that go into that apical meristem into the other parts of the plant, and questioning, I can't really, maybe Vern, you have a better grasp on this, but whether or not you're actually sending it back into a little more vegetative space, or you're actually helping promote ripening on what's remaining. So that was something I was curious about, was whether or not topping actually does what you think it's going to do. But I mean, it definitely eases your management stress of the plants crowding a top and causing ventilation issues and all of that.
I find they fight back too. There's a lot of growth at the edge of the leaves and even at the bottom. So you really have to keep pruning, because they do fight back. Yeah.
They want to keep growing. Nathan, do you want to ask your question out loud that you just typed in, or?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yep.
So I have a totally different water scheduling than most people. I think everyone that I know, partially because I started farming in California, where we had very little water. But so I've kind of carried over the watering plan that I did there, which was I just water once a week, sometimes even as little as once every 10 days. And it'll be a really heavy, deep water where I'll water 3 to 4 hours, just kind of depending on how much I'm out there. And I'll just do it right after I have a harvest, and I have very little splitting, almost none, and very little disease. And I don't know if that's because of how I'm watering, or if it's just because I have good airflow. It's also just cherries, so that makes a big difference, I know. But I'm also curious if people would then think that I'm losing production because they're not growing, maybe they're not getting as much water as they need. So I just wondering if anyone has any thoughts about that.
This is Vern. Just so much depends on soil texture, organic matter levels. So as Becky said earlier, if you're on a really sandy soil, that probably wouldn't work. But if you can retain the water, it makes sense.
Yeah, Scott Hertzberg is saying that's how he waters too, Nathan. And I remember going to John and Nancy Hayden's farm when they were growing cherry tomatoes years ago, and he was like, "Oh, I'm all about dry farming," and he wasn't. I think he was pretty much not watering at all, and was convinced that his flavor and production were really good. Almost like he had trained the plants to not need dripped in water. But
it's also root exploration in your profile. So if you have compaction, or if you don't have nutrients down deep enough? In other words, if the roots aren't going where you're putting the water, you kind of induce drought by having shallow rooted plants and you have to water more often.
Yeah, I mean, to grow sun golds in a tunnel without splitting is a victory, Nathan. So I'd say stick with it. That's awesome.
Hey, Becky, this is Dan Bernsteel from New Hampshire.
Hi, Dan.
I was growing in a high tunnel. I'm now working with NCAT, but I was growing in a small farm. We were using an in-ground earth heat exchanger, which was using like a active fan ventilation system to pull air down into the ground, heat up that soil mass during the hot months, and then in the wintertime, drawing that back up and heating the air. We were seeing, we got a SARE grant, it's still in progress, but we were seeing in the winter, we could get on average 3 degrees warmer throughout the entirety of the winter. We saw a lot of that come on nights where it was freezing outside. We'd kind of stay up above freezing most of the time. Still haven't been able to see, we wanted to see how that would affect heating in the tunnels. Obviously, you're heating more of an area by heating that thermal mass, but we're hoping that that could increase your efficiency in heating as well. We also wanted to do some studies on cooling effects during the summer, because obviously banking that heat, you're going to be drawing out cooler air in the summertime. So there is something going on there. We're not exactly sure what those numbers are, but we do know that there's something going on in the winter time. So hold off for more.
Wow. Thanks for sharing. Chris is popping out of his smile's big right now. He's like,
Yeah, there's been quite a few folks adopting climate battery systems like that. There were some great presentations on that topic at, I think, the last New England Fruit and Veg conference that was held in person.
yeah, that was the guy in Canada, right?
That's right. Yeah, David, I can't remember his last name. He actually helped us design ours, especially the fan systems.
Okay, Greenberg.
That's right. Yep.
And the other recent one I know of was Jen and Mike Palulis at Echo Creek in Salem, New York. And one of the nice things they did was they went all in on an improved controller to address part of the issue you brought up, Dan. You know, at banking the heat when you can, as long as it's not the result of heating. So controlling that ground exchange relative to when you're actively heating, so you're not heating the ground with your fuel. So
another problem that we identified with lettuces in the winter, which I would imagine could also apply to if you're trying to get those tomatoes out nice and early. We saw a lot of increased moisture that led to rot in the wintertime, because when you're drawing that warm air from the ground, you know, you're getting the condensation as it hits the cool air. You know, my original thought was, well, we're going to see a spike in relative humidity. But of course, in that early morning time, you're seeing mostly 99% relative humidity anyway. So it immediately condenses that water and you just start getting a ton of water dripping in, doesn't dry out fast enough. I think in the shoulder months, you might get around it, but still might see some problem with tomatoes.
that was my biggest concern, was relative humidity impact. And Jen and Mike have had the opposite experience. So there's some nuance going on here that I think we need to better understand. Would love to talk more with you about your project.
I'd be happy to, yeah.
Hans.
Hey there. Yeah, I'm a novice here, but I put up a high tunnel that I copied a peak vent that I've seen in a lot of growers. And then I was really having a lot of trouble opening the peak vent because it would get stuck and it didn't have the gravity basically to make it work. And I just experimented with some bungee cords, and I do have a picture of it. Let's see if I can share it real quick. And it worked great. So that's the peak vent, if you can all see that. And there's a little bungee cord that's sort of hanging. You can almost see it from, and it hooks in behind the peak vent. And so it's tensioned right. When I pull it up, it has a few pounds of tension on it. And then I just let it go and it opens automatically. And it's super slick. That's it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Hans. That might be the most gorgeous house I've ever seen. Those peak vents are something I wanted to touch on. They're really fairly easy to make, I think I have had kind of the similar problem, kind of getting them to open and close easily, especially we have some really tall tunnels on my farm, and figuring that open close system has been hard, but I think they are the lowest cost way to get that air up and out if you don't have a ridge fence. So I know Four Corners Farm has some really giant ones. Route 5 Farm has some really nice ones. In a panic, we have I can't remember how it happened, but ours wouldn't open, and we just like cut a triangle in the plastic and let it flop for the summer, and then taped it back up again, and that that works well too. So oh, Sandy's doing a climate battery, and it's 1 o'clock. Thank you so much, farmers who shared. Really awesome. Thank you. And love to have more chatter about tunnel stuff. So Sandy's saying for the 2022 in-person New England Vegetable Conference, they're having updated info. So thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.